Right, you could do it for authenticity, you could do it for authorial, just depending on what you're doing, because account could be the personal account or it could actually be the actual document. The next one is definitely only what the writer is authorial. So when you do, the thing is that you don't want to put bias in those blanks. You don't want to say the account is biased. You don't want to say the writer is biased. Instead of using the word bias, you would use one of those other terms. So saying the writer is a contemporary would mean what? What's contemporary mean?
With the time.
Yeah, current or up to date, honest as, or an admirer, an outsider, as opposed to saying the writer is biased. So using that he's a contemporary, would influence the way that he wrote, or that he's an admirer would influence whatever the case is. So using those type of things would help you stray away from using the word bias. And then last one is definitely the source is what type of POV? Authenticity. So it's a newspaper, therefore, blah, blah, blah. It's a private letter, therefore. You have to be careful because on the practice DBQ thing especially, some of you are saying things like, with the tables, the document 5, I think, or 6 was tables, like A tables. Some of you are like, these are reliable sources because they're statistics. No, yeah, Sarah made a bad face. Yeah, that's never going to work for you. Why?
Statistics can easily be biased.
Right. People can manipulate. They can manipulate statistics.
They can be
skewed,
unreliable.
right? Skewed or unreliable. Okay, so be careful of that because I get a lot of students, and not just y'all, other students from other places that want to say, oh, it's statistics, they're true. All right, you can't do that. But some of you went above and beyond and you were like, due to the fact that the sources that provided these statistics are trustworthy, like the League of Nations and the Almanac, whatever the little sources went on there, that's great because then you're giving the credit to the reliability of the institutions providing the statistics, and that's okay. But you always have to be leery because people can manipulate and skew statistics and do whatever they want. Same thing with government reports. A lot of times students want to say that government reports are reliable because they're government reports. But just like anything else, you have to be careful because depending on what they want the audience to say is going to do that. So just make sure you always give a lot of explanation of why something is reliable as if it's official and not just say just because it's a government always means it's the truth. And then the last little one with asterisks, if you ever get a document that has very little about it, it's anonymous or there's not a lot of information, that is a key to you that it's probably not reliable. It says there is insufficient source information, therefore we should question the document as a good historical evidence. So when you have very little given about, like it doesn't say where the table is from or it doesn't say where the document's from, then you should always question it as not being so reliable because you just don't know where it came from. And so that's kind of a red flag that it might not be a good source to use and to point that out.
So if you on the final exam, you know it's going to be about
Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So, and going back to that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, the final exam one, you will be an ideal situation for you because you won't feel the time restraints as much as you will on the AP exam because you get 2 hours to do your final and your adrenaline's going, and most of my students finish the multiple choice part or the Scantron part very fast. So almost all of you will have more than an hour to do the DBQ because people went through the one part. So it's not ideal practice for the AP exam, but it's very rare that people, you have ample time, usually 60 minutes plus to finish the DBQ. So, you won't have to worry so much about 35 minutes and writing it, so you'll get to do it all. But then, of course, for the AP exam, you'll be in that crunch again. So, for the final, it's ideal for the most part. Okay, so other thing about POV before I shut it down. One, remember, you don't have to do all different types. You could do authorial for the whole thing if you wanted to. It's best, whatever's best for the document. The rule, though, this is important because some of you are not doing enough. The rubric says to get basic core points, you have to do a minimum of 3. But I told you a long time ago, always do more than 3. Why? Insurance, right? Because if 1 is wrong and you only do 3, now the highest score you can get on the exam is what? If assuming everything's 6. A 6, assuming everything else is right. You don't want to do that. The rule, let's see how many of you remembered it. I told you 2 times ago, whatever we're talking about it. There's a magic number. You're going to have different documents. You may have 10, you may have 12, you may have 6. What do I tell you to do with the number of documents to tell you how many POVs? Half plus 1. You take the number of documents divided by 2 and add 1. So yesterday you should have strived for how many minimum? Or 10. 6. If you would have been going for the gold, you would have done 6 POV analysis. Because, let me tell you why. I didn't come up with that magic all by myself. Turn to the page in the packet where the rubric is. What does it say about POV and expanded core?
Analyze its point of view of most or all.
Most or all? What's most? Half plus 1.
Oh.
Okay? You have plus 1, you're going for expanded core points. Okay? And you're giving yourself ample insurance, correct? Okay, so it's not just Miss Wainwright coming up with magic little formulas. It's because I'm trying to get you expanded core points, you know? So that is why you should, it takes time. That's the hard part. It takes time. But the more you do, the more you're going for expanded core and the more you're going for document use. So that's important to know as well. Be careful with tone. Some people are still messing up tone. Remember, tone is about saying why the document could either be more credible or not. You know, if somebody's angry, their tone is angry, they're probably going to be less reliable because they're emotional and they can't really, deal with the subject. So just make sure that you look at old soapstones and things about how to use tone and using paraphrases and quotes to help you with that one. I feel that one is probably one of the more harder ones to do, but sometimes there's really good tones in documents and you want to take advantage of that. Okay, so questions about grouping or POVs. We practiced those a little bit, but before we went on. Okay, yes?
If you wanted to, like you did, like, let's say for the last one, could you have done like 6, tutorials?
Sure. Just stay with the tutorial the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as they're all valid. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. There's no rule that says it has to be a tutorial, POV, or whatever. As long as you're doing them correctly, that's the most important thing. It sounds redundant, but that's not the point of the DBQ. It's just like they want to see that you know how to do those things.
But you shouldn't do POV from the same source.
Yes, you should only do one POV from each source because you only get credit once for doing a POV. You won't get it for doing it again. Okay, and so before I go over the first page, if you look on the back, speaking of redundancies, because a lot of people don't like the DBQ because it does sound so mechanical, you will constantly be saying the document says, the document stated, the document says. If you're one of those people that like to use different words and not the same words all the time, I've created this other document or put together a list of a better way to say said so you don't constantly say stated said. So you can kind of like look at that and come on, it's on the back of the first page. You're on the back, yeah. So if you look at that, there's a few vocab words that you can throw in there from time to time to ease yourself from that monotony of using over and over. Yeah, so some of us, and here's the deal. If you say stated said over and over again, who cares? It doesn't matter. You're not going to get penalized. It's just more of a personal preference for you. All right. Okay, so let's go to the front. We're ready to start digging through this. Okay. Time management, not going to say much of. All you know is what? Looking at those numbers makes you feel how? Nauseous. Yeah, nauseous, disgusting. Okay, but that's the reality. That's the world you have to be able to adhere to by the time May comes around. Pre-write. Okay, remember, we're looking at the pre-write as that whole 10 plus 5 to, no more than 15-minute chunk that you have with that, trying to get much of it done in the 10 minutes. You want to spend at least a minute or two with your prompt. Okay, some people, I actually had somebody say out loud that they didn't even read the question on the one we did. And I was like, how did you answer the question? They're, I didn't even know that was a question. Okay, you need to read the question. That's important. So if we use our one we did on Wednesday as an example, and you'll have that out, what was the task, because it says under dissect the prompt, what was the task or directive where you were given on your one we just did? So if you analyze. Okay, you were asked to analyze. So number one, knowing what that means is a big deal because it wasn't asking you to compare and contrast. That's what we did on our other essay. But some of you got confused because you saw similarities and differences, and that's okay because some of you might have turned it into a comparative essay, which is a type of analysis. But you really just had to analyze similarities and differences of cotton mechanization. And so at a base, you're looking for similarities, you're looking for differences, and what does it mean to analyze? Talk about why or the significance of those similarities and differences. Okay, so that was your task to find out. Then you also want to spend some time looking for words to underline for parameters. Is there time, place, class, categories? Does it give you specific things to focus on? So on that question, what were our parameters? Japan and India. The time period gave you dates, right? It told you a certain date through a certain date to look at, was it 18 something to 18 something. So you had a date you had to stick with. You had to talk about India and Japan, and then you talked about the mechanization of cotton. So you had to talk about those things to be on task. And then last but not least, what are your key terms in the prompt? What are your body paragraphs supposed to be about? What should be the analysis? So similarities and differences, cotton mechanization, right? So You spend time, and a lot of you do this because I see it when I grade your essays. You circle words, you underline words. I want to see that because usually when I grade a bad essay, after I've read it, I look at the prompt and I'm looking for, did they take a minute or two to look at it and underline? And if they haven't, then it tells me, well, you didn't even spend 2 seconds looking at your question. You didn't know what you were doing. Now, some people, they don't have to write anything. They'll do fine. But it's worth taking a minute or two to underline and highlight and circle words so you know you can direct yourself. And then the rest under pre-write is stuff we've already done. You know, planning, finding patterns, writing notes to yourself in that 10-minute reading period, figuring out how you're going to answer the question. With that said, if you look at the third page, I've made the pre-write that I've showed you on the backboard before, but this is what it looks like typed out. Now, unfortunately, no one's going to give you this nice little piece of paper on the day of the AP exam, but you can create it, okay? As you're looking at the documents and you're writing on the documents in that 10-minute period, you want to draw one of these yourself so that you give yourself a roadmap when they say, okay, it's time to take out your booklet and start writing, because you're going to want this in front of you to cross off things as you go. So you have a place to write a rough draft for a thesis. You have the paragraph categories, which will become your groups, you know, and then where to put your documents. Have I used all the documents? Cross them off as I go. What are possible POVs? And then, of course, ideas for your additional documents. Having this in front of you will help you stay on track so you can see it, and it takes, you know, it could easily be done in that 10-minute reading period or 10 to 15 to be able to do that, and then you can cross it off. So this is the prescribed pre-write for you to work off on the DBQ to make sure you have everything in front of you for your points. Okay, then we get back to the front to writing the actual essay. Now you've done our pre-write, you're ready to go. Everyone has to have an introduction paragraph that is thesis targeted, meaning you have your funnel, you've set your scene, you've addressed your prompts, you've taken a position. 3 to 5 sentences. If you're writing more than 5, you're overworking yourself. You're losing time in a different area. Keep it to 3 to 5 sentences. And yes, it's possible to do in 3 to 5 sentences. You just have to keep it short and sweet. Remember that. Most of the samples that I've given you to look at keep it short and sweet, okay? So make sure that you do that. And we do that with all our essays. Set the scene, address the prompt, state a position with categories for analysis. It doesn't matter if we're doing comparative, DBQ, or comparative or change over time. All of those things are applicable. Okay, so y'all do that. Then you have to use all our documents, you know that. You can't just summarize the documents, but you have to connect the prompt and to the thesis. So once again, you can't just be like, document 2 says ladies are fat, document 3 says men are pigs, document 4, you know, whatever. You can't just restate what they say. You have to use them as evidence. To get more expanded core points, it says to refer to the documents by author, title, and number. It's real easy when you're trying to go fast just to say document 1, document 2, document 3. But if you use attribution, because that's what you do in a real research paper, they're going to reward you for being more sophisticated. So if you can say, according to Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, blah, 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 parentheses, document 2, that's more like a real research paper. So if you can do parenthetical citations of the document and use the name and title, you'll get rewarded for that, for being more persuasive about the way you use them. We already talked about POVs. Outside information. Notice that's there. What do you think that means, outside information?
Something that's not in the documents.
Something that's not in the documents. But we're not talking about additional source. We're talking about you bringing up facts that you know about that time period in your essay as you write about the documents to show you know more. And that is expanded core. You can write it to the side. It's not basic, but outside information, there's a bullet in the expanded core that says you've provided outside information as well. So when you can throw in some little facts you know, like for instance, maybe you're like talking about working conditions and you're like, oh, Betty Harris, I remember that story. So you know, at one of your sentences, you're like, Betty Harris was one of the women that worked in the mines that was mistreated. You know, her account would also fit the description of the evidence provided or whatever. That could count as additional document. You know, or you could say, if you start your sentence with, it would have been good to hear from Betty Harris, that would be additional. But if you just are like, there were other people like Betty Harris, then it can count as outside information too. So, or saying how India was devastated, their textile industry was devastated by the British, and you know that wasn't provided, but you know you read it in your textbook. Throw it in there when you can, because you will get expanded core points. Next year in APUSH, 50% of your DBQ has to be outside information, and the other half is documents. So it's half and half. So with us, it's just documents. Next year you have to have
more time, right?
No, it's the same time. Yeah, yeah.
How is this supposed
Yeah.
to be like?
But,
Having the same number of documents?
and like I said, they've changed a little bit, and I don't know how close it is to O1. In A-Push, you only had to use 50% of the documents, not all of them. So it was a balance where with us, the more focus is using all the documents and a little bit outside. Additional docs, remember you have to say something that's missing and why it's helpful. You got that. Okay, so now, fun times. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, we're going to this wonderful chart looking thing. And what do you think this is?
Example
It's
of
a
body paragraph.
dissected body paragraph. Okay, so, and y'all are going to mark it up more. I did a little skeleton for you, but we have more to add here. Okay, so it starts. This was on the intellectual hallmarks of the Renaissance. The kids had analyzing the intellectual hallmarks of the Renaissance, and so this is what they did. So the topic sentence says, another intellectual characteristic of the Renaissance was the increased interest by Europeans in things of this world. So we know this isn't the first body paragraph. How?
Another.
Another implies that, oh, I'm going into a different body paragraph. Okay, so the topic sentence could possibly be a group as long as all of the things they talk about are about what, according to the topic sentence?
Increased interest.
The whole.
Okay, but not just the increased interest, but what's the topic of
The
the
hallmarks of the Renaissance.
what hallmark is being addressed in this topic sentence?
Intellectual characteristics.
No, that's part of the hallmarks. Which
Things.
things of this world. Thank you.
Things of this
Secular.
world.
That secular things. Okay, things of the world means secular, not religious, but secular. So
Oh.
if this kid is gonna get a group, we haven't decided yet. All of the documents should be about things of this world, and if that's the case, we can give them the group. So they start. 15th century Europeans continued to be quite religious, but were increasingly interested in secular concerns. Notice I called this evidence. What kind of evidence?
Outside.
Outside information, absolutely. So they get their little expanded core. If they, assuming they get all their points, they'll get it
Oh,
outside.
that's all you would have to say.
That's it. Then, Castiglione, in his advice to the young members of the court, implies a myriad of interests such as music, tennis, dancing, soldiering, poetry, and other secular things. So you get a document address and a document meaning or evidence. How do we know it's a document?
Doc meeting.
He says
No. He says Castiglione. He uses the author's name. Okay, remember, we're only looking at the right. So he's addressed it by name, and he's provided evidence from the document, clearly saying music, tennis, blah, blah, blah is from the document. So he's got that. Since Castiglione was himself a member of the nobility, his comments can be accepted as accurately reflecting secular interests of upper-class Europeans in the 15th century. What type of POV is that?
Authorial.
Authorial. Good. So we've got one POV. Document B and C by Da Vinci reveal other worldly interests of Renaissance men. In document B, Da Vinci advises artists to study human anatomy and animals, not to focus on religious revelations if they want to be better artists. In document C, Da Vinci's secular interests involve military equipment and engineering. Okay, a lot going on there. We've got document use and evidence for which ones?
B and C.
B and C. We've got a a group. We've got a subgroup, and now we can count the bigger group because now we have three. We could have counted before, but we have Castiglione, we've got B and C, all about worldly things so far. So we've got the big group, which is the topic sentence, and now we have a subgroup, B and C, being put together. So this kid has got two groups so far. Continue going. In assessing the values of document C, we need to remember that Da Vinci was offering his services to the Duke of Milan and may have overemphasized his abilities just to make a sale. What type of POV is that? Authenticity, because it's saying that because this is a job resume or an application, we have to be careful about it. Okay, so two POVs. The final evidence of secular interest of the Renaissance comes from the Polish astronomer Copernicus, who studied the idea of a heliocentric universe. He used mathematics to put forth his argument, not religion. Okay, there's a lot going on here. We've got document use, and we've got document evidence, but we also have, again, what kind of evidence?
Outside.
Outside information.